In this example, between two strong masters, I want to show you how the power of two bishops working together can be sometimes more powerful than an enemy rook. In this example, you're going to see two masters playing a positional game, but it's going to be based on tactics. You're going to have to be very sharp. You're going to have to follow me very closely to understand what's going on. But follow the bishop's battle, if anything else, and watch how two bishops, side by side, can control the enemy. Here is a great example of that. Bishop captures e4 was white's first move in this example, or in this game. So this move makes a lot of sense, but it's also one that kind of looks dangerous. Anytime that you capture a pawn like this in the center of the board, you open yourself up to the possibility that your opponent's pieces could be kind of x-raying them. So the rook is x-raying the bishop, and if this bishop were to move out of the way and attack something, then this bishop could find itself under threat along with the other piece. You could find yourself in a double attack really quickly. So you got to be super careful when you take this. But of course, Botvinnik, who was a world champion in the 1950s, I want to say, was totally aware of what he was doing. And he made this move, understanding the consequences, and proved that he knew what he was doing as a world champion. I guess you probably don't have to prove that, but hey, your opponents are challenging you. You need to prove that you can at least beat them. So bishop to h3. And this, of course, immediately targets that trapped rook on d1, or you f1, while unleashing a nasty threat on the bishop. Now, White wanted to win this game because he was the world champion, and London was an unknown grandmaster. Grandmaster and unknown, of course, are really kind of not synonymous, but, I mean, comparatively speaking to the world champion, the world class was a class of its own compared to the lower level grandmasters. So after this move, what Mr. London was wanting to have happen was for Botvinnik to bring his bishop back to g2, have the bishops exchanged, have the queens exchanged, and then to go about capturing this pawn on e2. This is a direct tactical line. There's no sidelines or anything to worry about. This is just a simple force line. And London was thinking, let's make this exchange. I'm going to give up my e4 pawn. I'll take your e2 pawn because that's what in essence happened. We traded, of course, the pawn on e4 for the pawn on e2, while also, of course, trading bishops and trading queens. Getting to an endgame with relatively low amounts of material left on the board, you would think that in this pretty even position, that maybe London could find a way to make a draw. That's what London was hoping for. But White wanted more. He wanted to win. And that's what a lot of masters want. They want more and they want to win. And they don't just say that like all of us non-masters do. I don't know if I'm a master or not. I'm a candidate master. But all of us sub-2200s love to just say that we're going to blow our opponents off the board with a big attack. We love to say that we're going to win with our material. But do we? We have to put our money where our mouth is. And after bishop to h3, White made a big-time bet. And he kept the threats. He played, after this move, bishop takes e4, he went queen to c2. Exclam. Queen to c2. Avoiding trading queens, leaving the attacking options on the board. Also defending this bishop on e4 while threatening the enemy knight. That is a move that does a lot. Avoids simplification, defends, and attacks. But of course, there's one thing that London assumed would be his trump card. And that would be that this rook on f1 is kind of lost. So he can capture this rook on f1, and after queen to c2, that's exactly what Mr. London did. After king takes f1, it's black to play, and he's up in exchange for a pawn. So in other words, he's got a single pawn advantage, 5 versus 3 and 1. So what does black do? It's his move. He's got the material. You would think that this is all going to be good for black. What black failed to understand was the power of the two bishops. Let's see them shine. King takes f1, and then we see the move knight to d6, an excellent move, threatening the enemy bishop and forcing us to retreat it. So after this move, white played the somewhat surprising but straightforward move bishop takes d6. And obviously we don't see for a long time the two bishops on the board. You might say, well, why would you call this a two bishops example? Because this was kind of a mistake. Really, the best thing in this position for black maybe would have been to try to bring the knight back into the defense, try to save himself the agony of what's about to happen. But instead, white played a tactical sequence here. After knight to d6, he played bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and now there's a choice of pawns that white gets to capture. He chose to play bishop takes h7, of course. Now the enemy king is very vulnerable. So instead of there being the two bishops attack, and maybe a little bit of a safer king, white has now moved into a bishops of opposite color position with a very weak king. And you're going to see how actually this game is going to go downhill really fast. In fact, already it's almost shoo-in that white's won this game. Let me just show you an example of what actually happened. So black played a rad move. He played rook a d8, and then knight to f3, threatening to just bring another piece even closer to the attack, maybe knight h4, knight to g6. Rook to f8, getting the king out of the way, king g2. And after this, queen e6 was played. Okay, looking good for black. Black isn't even down a bishop. It's one bishop versus one bishop. Has a rook for a knight now, and is dominating the center. What could possibly go wrong? After this move, queen e6, white has a winning tactic. He played the move I'm missing something here. What move was it? Bishop takes a7, rook a8, knight f3, rook f8. Oh, bishop g6 here. Queen to e6. He played the move bishop g6. And black went rook to d5. Bishop g6, rook d5. So now almost looking dominant. The rook is threatening g5 or b5. It's now, of course, controlling all of the fifth rank, preventing a lot of attacking ideas, but ran straight into the move pawn to e4. So rook to d6 was played, and the move that won the game, rook b4. This bishop is so strong. It's cutting off two key squares for the enemy to retreat from. We're about to find out that this king is very close to being trapped. Rook b4, do you see what the threat is? Bishop e7. First we see the move bishop to f5, queen to h6, and now rook c4. And it looks like the rook is worming his way in. There's nothing to be done about this. Bishop to d8 was a very strong move, but that allowed pawn to e5, threatening the rook. And at this point, Black, I think, started playing a little bit senselessly. He left the bishop on the board, tried to keep his material advantage and went rook d5, but now it allowed the move knight h4. Now the threat is to just simply go in here, to go knight g6 check, king g8, maybe even bishop to e6 check, and get very close to checkmating Black and winning back a lot of material, a couple of rooks at least. So knight to h4, forced rook to d2, trying to counter-attack. Okay, so white just moved the queen. The threats are still there. King g8, getting out of the fork I just mentioned. Rook f4, now with the threat of a discovery, bishop e6 would force the king to move, and then our rook would gobble gobble. Always look for the checks. Bishop e6 does not quite work here. We'd have to go queen to b3 check, which would force the king to move. Because if bishop e6, then of course, be careful. They have a piece that could take our bishop. So after rook f4, rook to d5, again, just trying to save the rook, keep the material. After the move queen f3, Black resigned the game. He's up material, but he resigned because he knows the game is over. If he moves his rook to a safe square, let's say to d2 again, the move bishop e6 now is a game ender. Queen takes e6, rook takes f8, king to h7, queen to h5, queen to h6, and now queen to e8, and all of a sudden rook e8 mate is virtually unstoppable. In fact, there's no way except sacrificing a million pieces. So instead of trying to fight on, Black resigned in this position.